by the end of this video, you should be able to learn how to use for loops and while loops, and you should be able to make a random number guessing game. Hi, my name is CodeSection, and today I'll be teaching you everything you need to know about loops. Before we get started, let me show you how to do the last episode's challenge. So last episode, we did say that we want to build an application which calculates the BMI based on your height and weight. So in this case, you must ask for the input of both height and weight. So this is the formula we need. So let me quickly copy that right here. All right, everything will be error, which is definitely fine. We will adjust it later. So we want to get input of height and weight. So let me just get the height. We just want to put the input, and what we want to say is insert your height in meters. All right, and for weight, we do the same thing. All right, and this is where the BMI comes in. So we have height and weight input ready. So when the user puts anything in here, they should in fact be putting in height and weight. Let me put this as floats. Let me put the entire thing here in, let's do floats just to be safe. All right, now because we have done that, we now have here. So this is the formula for BMI. So let me do a new one. We want to translate that into an actual working thing. So let's do weight divided by height times 2. The reason we put 2 multiplication sign here is because it resembles the square, the caret sign, like this, multiplication sign. Now let's try this. 1.7, 65.1, and our BMI is at 22.53. We want to round that, so let's do that. To round this to the nearest 2 decimal places, we can do :.2f. Now what this does is basically it tells the BMI mark that we want to round everything up to 2 decimal places. So 0.2f resembles 2 decimal places. We can even do 1 or 3 decimal places, but let's be safe and do 0.2. So let me put everything in again. So 1.7, 65.1, and our BMI should be 22.53. Back to the tutorial. All right, so let's get started with loops. Okay, so let's imagine that we have 8 apples here. We want to put all of them one by one into a box. So the box right now has 0 items. So what we can do here is we can tell ourselves put 1 apple into the box and add this by 1. And if you can translate this into code, so let's say put an apple into the container, put apples. You can imagine that if we do this, if we want to do it for 8 times, we want to put this 8 times. So like this times 8. But there's a much more simpler way to do this. So let me show you how to do it. So because we already know that we're trying to put apples into this container, what we can do with the program is we can do a thing called loops. So as you know from the last example I gave you, we gave apples as 8 of them. We want to put it into the container. But if we want to do that without being tediously just copy and pasting all of this, somehow the apple went from 8 to like, I don't know, 64. You're gonna have to copy and paste that 64 times, which in hindsight is not very good practice. So how do we do this? Well, that's where the loop comes in. Basically what it does is you put a simple command. So let's say put apples, and the loop basically just say, hey, run this command 64 times without me pasting it 64 times. So basically just put this one line and let the loop run and run and run again for 64 times. So how do we put this into coding way? Well, I'm glad you asked, because we're gonna do that just right now. So here's the first type of loop, which is called for loops. With what I just explained before, let's do it. So let's say we have apples being 64 of them, and container has 0. So if we want to add apples to the container, we have to do apples minus equals 1. This is a special case where from 64 you want to minus it by 1. So normally you would type it in apples equals apples minus 1. This is when we want to put the new value for apples to be equal to that of apples here, 64 minus 1. This is a shorthand sign of how you can do it. But anyways, we have subtracted by 1. Let's add it to the container. Container plus equals 1. So if we print the amount of apples in container, then this is what we should get. We should get 63 and 1, where 63 is apples and 1 is container. But if we want to do this, like if we want to do this for like 8 times, we don't want to just, copy like this or such. So there's a better way to do this, and that's where for loop comes in. So what can we do with this? Well, for loop is basically we give it the specific amount of steps or how many times we want to loop this. So this is how we do it. We first type in for, and let's do for I in range, and this is where the number comes in. So for I in range, let's put apples. So there are 64 apples. So what we can do is for I in range of 64, we wanna, let me indent this. This is the first case that you're probably gonna need indent aside from the if else statement. So anyways, what this code does is basically it loops 64 times, and each time it reduces the amount of apples by 1 and add it to the container by 1. So if we use this analogy and we try to print it out like this, let's do the amount of apples and amount of container, where we let the amount of apples be apples container. And if we try to run this, you will see 64 lines in total. So let's do it. And as you can see, voila. So once we start, we tell them to reduce the amount of apples by 1 and add it to the container, as what we did. And we repeated that for 64 times until there are only no apples and there are 64 of them into the container. So that is the first type of loop. Now let's talk about the second type of loop, which is while loops. This is a very good loop that you might use. So back with the apple analogy that I was talking about. So this while loop is actually very powerful in a way. So let me teach you how to use it. Now remember when I say that if the amount of apples can be changed, so maybe sometimes it became 64 or it became 8 or 128, we don't want to like just hard code everything into the entire container type of stuff, right? So this is where while loop comes in. While loop in this case can tell you about how many apples there are. So let's say we have 64 apples initially. So while loop basically does the same thing as the normal for loops, but it's special with where you can pass in the amount of apples that you have, and it will check it automatically if it is equal or not equal to 0. So with this analogy, this is how it works. So this is for loop. While loop works like this. While we say apples is not 0, this is a very good way to teach you. You will run whatever is inside here. So all we can do is apples minus equals 1, container plus equals 1. And we can copy this and put it here. And we can run it. As you can see, it still works. But now you might be asking, well, if this does this function, what's the point of even having this? Or what's the point of using this if this exists? Here's the deal breaker. This is kind of also important because you can do a lot of things with it. But simply, while loops basically loops on whatever condition you gave it, but for loops in how many times you want it to be. So here's the cons for the for loop. If we change the amount of apples here, we also have to change it here. The reason we can't just put apples here is because every time we run the loop, you realize that the amount of apples is going to be reduced by 1. And since that links to the apples here, then it will always change this. So that is not how this is going to work. But in the other hand, for while loops, if you change the amount of apples to, let's say, 256, you do not need to change anything else. So here you go. There we go. It ran for 256 times without me touching the code at all. Just changing the apples alone. Right. So how can we use this with inputs? So let's make a simple program out of it. So to do that, let me teach you some libraries. The first library is called the random library. So how do you use that? If you remember from the arithmetic episode, you should be familiar with the import function. So import, what it does is basically it adds this library that will help you within the code itself. So maybe some functions that Python do not have. The import function basically just tells your computer to add an outsider module like math, randomize, random, IPython, whatever it is. So let me teach you how to use one more library. It is called the random module. This module basically gives you the ability to randomize stuffs. So let me give you a basic of how to use it. Let's say we want to get a random number. So let's say number equals random dot. You will see a lot of things here, but I'll teach you the most basic ones. So, all right, let's do random dot rand integer. So what this does is basically there are two arguments. So the first argument being a and b, like this. We want to start with the number we want to start. So let's say we want to start with 1 and we want to end it at 47. What it does here is basically this function will random from number 1 to 47. So it will not exceed from either 1 or 47. So if we try to print the number out, as you can see, every time you run, the number is different. So how can we use this to our advantage? Well, we can use this to make what we will do today, which is called the challenge. And the challenge for you today is you want to build a number guessing game that uses for loops, while loops, and it should ask for the input. So it should be something like this. Guess the number between 1 and 10. So first time you put in 7, it will tell you if it's too low or too high. The input, second input, we tried to put 9 and it is too high. And then third time, we put in 8 and it is correct. It should print out the number of tries to guess the number. That is it for this episode. If you do not understand anything, feel free to comment, and the next episode I will try my best to explain whatever each of them does and stuff like that. Thank you for watching. Take care.